Hi there, Steve here again. I'm sort of interested in the subject of pronunciation, and I've done 2 videos now on the subject, and I had some feedback which I want to respond to, and I want to maybe talk a little more about it from a different angle. There were 2 comments to my previous video where 2 people took exception to the fact that I didn't think that the International Phonetic Alphabet was that important, the IPA. And one person said something to the effect of, you can't start imitating the pronunciation without being familiar with the entire inventory of phonemes in a language. And there were some thumbs up for that. I don't agree. Okay, and I'm going to talk about in this video why I think what I call big picture learning is much more important than the individual details, like the international phonetic symbol for a particular sound. Another commentator, also along the same lines, said that, for example, in French, you have the sound OU and you have the sound U. And there is apparently the IPA symbol for U is a Y, if I read this correctly. And he said that if you can't make the difference, then you might say, instead of saying merci beaucoup, you would say merci beaucoup. And beaucoup means nice bum. So I'm going to comment on these things. First of all, I always say that in language learning there's 3 fundamental issues. Your attitude, the amount of time you put in, and your ability to notice. Everything else is secondary. So, most people who learn a foreign language would like to pronounce well, but not everyone. And many immigrants, and I mentioned the example of my father, who lived in Canada for however many, 30, 40 years, never really was that motivated to try to improve his accent. He didn't feel that he wanted to be buddy-buddy with your average Canadian. He wasn't that way motivated. He communicated very well, and he had a very pronounced accent. It didn't bother him. He did business here. He had friends here. He was happy. He wasn't motivated to improve his accent, which is fine, okay? However, and I've noticed that very often students who haven't had nearly the amount of exposure, for example, that my father had, they will often pronounce better because they're more motivated to improve their pronunciation. And so therefore they become more attentive to how things are pronounced. They're more motivated to blend in with the culture, and as a result they end up, so they're more deliberate about it, they want to do it more, they like the culture that they're learning, they end up pronouncing better. So, attitude, time, and being attentive. Now, the nuts and bolts, and I said in my previous video that you need to do a lot of listening to material that has resonance. I found that even though I lived in France for 3 years, my pronunciation in French actually improved the last few years because I started enjoying French audiobooks. So I can still remember jogging while listening to Les Mémoires d'Adrien by Marguerite Yourcenar, or I love Balzac, or I was gardening while listening to Les Liaisons Dangereuses, for example. I like classical literature, not everyone does. And I'm listening to it and I'm caught up in it, just like with Italian, listening to I Promessi Sposi, or another great recording by Il Narratore. You should look him up, ilnarratore.com on the internet, great source of audiobooks in Italian, or in Italian, Rai has this Alle 8 della Sera series on history, and so listening to all this stuff really improved my pronunciation because I was focusing on not only the content but also getting that rhythm of the language. And I think the rhythm of the language, the intonation, is something that students of linguistics sometimes call prosody or something. I don't know that term. To me, it's just intonation, rhythm. That's much more important than certain particular sounds. Every language is going to have some sounds that are difficult. I pronounce Swedish quite well, but I have a lot of trouble saying 7. Sju. It's tough. It's a funny SH sound. It's a funny U sound. Okay, I'm happy though, I'm not going to spend hours trying to nail that down because I have the basic rhythm and flow of Swedish so that people listening to me find it fairly native-like. I can't imagine a person, say in French, who would have a good sense of the rhythm and intonation of French and who would say beaucoup. It just doesn't go with the rhythm. Beaucoup. Beaucoup, you would have heard so much that you would know if you saw a nice ass, you would say, beaucoup. Beaucoup. But it is also true. So there are some issues here. With regard to special sounds, either you are unable to pronounce these, which is sometimes the case, like people may not be able to make the U sound, or you may not have enough of a sense of the rhythm to know when it's U or U. Maybe you haven't listened enough, or you're trying to overcompensate. And we have all heard French people who put H's everywhere. I had a friend who spoke English very well, but there's a sort of a market area here in Vancouver called Granville Island. And he would always talk about Granville Island because he knows that he misses on his H's, so he puts H's in where they don't belong. But it's not because he doesn't know the international phonetic symbol for H or that he can't pronounce an H. He just doesn't have the proper rhythm in the language. One thing that's very difficult in French is the and en or un or un, and very often people get these kind of mixed up, and they go for maybe they'll have a default en, so no matter what it is, it's pronounced en. So it's not an inability to make the sound, it's that whole getting used to the flow and the intonation and for that matter, as I said with that Polish word pieniądze, which is money. I've got that word because I've been listening to Who Is She on Link, which is a story that we have in however many languages, and the word money comes up all the time. Or I noticed another word, wygląda. I haven't really focused in on it, but in Russian, wyglądać looks wygląda. So I'm picking up on little bits and pieces that start to sock into place, but I'm not worried about it. I'm just allowing that big picture to flow over me. There are rules that can help you. For example, the en, if you have en in French is pronounced en most of the time. But when it comes after an I or a Y, it's un, like Adrien or végétarien. And so you may not notice that, and you may say Adrien, végétarien. And so then, if you've had all this exposure and you see a rule that reminds you that, in fact, it's végétarien, Adrien, then that's going to make sense to you. But the idea that before you start out into a language, you can have all the sounds, that you can hear them all, that you can make them all, and that you know when, it's pronounced this way or that way, because not all languages are consistent. Again, going to French, donc, the C is pronounced, but yet very often the last consonant is not pronounced. So all I'm saying is that I should stress too that for people who find the bits and pieces, the International Phonetic Alphabet and so forth, or specific rules, who like to study that way, by all means. I'm not by any means suggesting people shouldn't do that. I always talk about what my experience is, and my experience has been that that's kind of a distraction. I want to expose myself to as much of the overall, the big picture as possible, and later on there are things that I'll miss, and at that point to go in and review some rules on pronunciation probably is a good thing. It's the same as with grammar. I can't possibly learn all the fundamental rules of grammar up front and then proceed to learn the language. I first have to get that massive exposure to the language and then, periodically go in and look at some rules of grammar, and now those rules relate to something. I've had so many experiences of people who get corrected on the pronunciation, some specific aspect of the pronunciation, and they go right back to making the same mistake. So I stress again that with regard to pronunciation, you have to have that attitude. You want to improve your pronunciation. You want to be one of them. You're prepared to listen a lot to what is to you attractive content, to try to notice things, to try to imitate them. You can always, I'll finish and then take the phone call. Just a sec here. Hello? 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 Hey Walter, can I call you in 5 minutes? Will do. Thanks. Bye. That's my carpenter. So, before I lose my train of thought here, nothing against the International Phonetic Alphabet. I don't use it. I find it not useful. If I can't pronounce something, you know, the Polish L, it seems like it's a L of some kind, you know, I'm going to have to get used to it. Whatever the phonetic symbol for that is, almost doesn't matter to me. I know I'm hearing it now. It's a bit of a more open L. I got to get used to it. But if others find that useful, by all means. However, there's no point, you know, I don't get the complete dismissal of the phonetic alphabet. All I said was, I don't find it that useful. Other people do. By all means, go for it. What else was I going to say here? Yeah, and if I can't make the sound or hear the sound, the phonetic alphabet isn't going to help me. However, it's, as I say, it's possible that I miss things. And at that point, some form of attention to detail, which might include the International Phonetic Alphabet, if you have learned it, might be helpful. There was also a question from one of my viewers who is working on French and is studying at university, and what can he do, I think it was a he, to work on French because he is going to go to France thereafter. And my answer is go to lingq.com. We have tons of content in our library, and listen to it. Or if you're advanced enough, get some audiobooks. And ideally, if you get audiobooks from, say, 19th century authors, and I loved listening to Guy de Maupassant and Balzac and so forth, you can then import the text from Gutenberg.org into Link, and you can listen to the audiobook and read the text, saving words and phrases to build up your vocabulary. So that's my answer to that person whose name now escapes me. Thank you for listening, and bye for now.